This is Kevin Lavadier with Geometronics, and today's video is going to be about using the Confidence Report tool. And we're going to follow the steps in the PDF workflow document. Should be titled ODOT Confidence Report Tool. And before we get started, starting step, you need a couple of things to use this tool. You need your ORD terrain file, so your DGN that has your terrain in it, and you need confidence points for the project. They need to be in a survey field book. They can be in with the raw data, or they can be all by themselves in an individual field book. One of the cautions that I will say before running this tool is that you do want to save and exit all Word documents before running the EXE tool, because it will close Word document as it processes your data files. This workflow is basically broken down into three main sections or procedures. The first one being generating the input data files, and then you move on to running the actual Confidence Report EXE tool, and then the final procedure is importing the process data into the terrain file for analysis. So I've already opened ORD and I've loaded my terrain file. Notice I have my terrain in here. We have all of our survey data that's creating the terrain. If you don't see your survey field book, you need to open Explorer. You'll go to your survey tab, and then you can drill into your survey data. Here we have one field book. Now that we have our drawing open, we'll go to the field book tab. We'll open the survey details, and we'll select all point features from the survey field book. This lists all the points in our DGN. Now I'm going to expand all point features. And I'm going to start by selecting the first point code for the confidence points. Now I'm going to hold a control and I'm going to select my other confidence point codes: CPG, CPN, CPR, and CPS. Now that those codes have all been selected, our survey details contain the list of only those points. Note, if you're familiar with survey filters, you can also use the survey filters that have been developed down here below the regular field book data to select these confidence points. But since I have them selected, I'm just going to use these. I'm going to data point in the upper left-hand corner of the table. That's going to select all entries that are shown in the survey details box. And the first thing we want to create is our point list file. So I'm going to right click on this light blue bar, and I'm going to select export selected items as land XML format. Now the Save As box is going to default to where your drawing was. But if I go to Desktop, Engineering, Survey, I have a couple of shortcuts in here. And one of them is to the input folder. Now that I have my input folder selected, I'm going to name my file. I'm going to name it with the key number and the terrain name, and then we're going to extend it with PTS list. We've got a land XML file chosen for our type, and we say save. Now the second step is we need to create our selection set of points to process. We've already got all confidence points selected, so I right-click in the blue bar, or I should say the left-hand column, and I say Selection, Create Selection Set. Now notice the survey details says we have 495 objects or survey records, and now ORD is telling us we have 495 objects selected. You want to make sure that those match. And if I zoom out a little bit here, you can see that we have all the manipulators highlighted for those 495 objects. So now that we have our selection, we need to go to the Terrain tab. And from the Analysis group, we're going to select Points in the drop-down, Analyze Elevation. Now it's going to ask you to select the terrain. So I can select any part of the terrain. I can select a contour, I could select a triangle, or I can select the perimeter. Ask me if I want to use the selected elements. I data point, and then I can enter a tolerance value. This tolerance value is not important because the report process or the tool is going to set the correct tolerances for our confidence points. So you can leave it at a value of 0.2, you could change it to a value of 0.1, and I will data point to accept it. And we now have Bentley's terrain check report. This does not contain the information we need for our confidence point report. So we need to select the raw XML format from the left-hand list. And then we're going to go up to File and say Save As. And because we've already put information in the input folder, it remembers that. And so I'm going to name it the exact same thing, 20485 underbar OG merged underbar, and this time the suffix or the end is going to be terrain check, CHK. We confirm that we've got XML selected for our save as type, and we say save. And that completes the first section of the tool. So we close the report browser. I'm going to data point in the black space just to clear the selection set. I'm going to close the survey details for now, and I'm just going to minimize ORD. So we're up to the second main section. We're going to open the engineering folder. We're going to open survey, and we are going to run the shortcut to the ODOT confidence point or ODOT confidence report. Now this program will take a minute. Basically, you get a DOS shell window with nothing at all in it. Just give it time. You notice right before it started, it actually puts the text in there that says, please wait loading. So you know you're close. So the first step with this tool tells you right at the header of this box, select the point list export. So that is our PTS list file. I say open. It defaults back to that input folder, and now it's asking for the terrain check export. Select the terrain check file. I say open. And now it defaults to the output folder for the tool. If you want to save it in a different folder, you can, but the easiest thing is just to say select folder. And now the tool will run. Notice once it completed, it closed the shell window. And if we go to our output folder, which we have a shortcut to here, and if I sort by date modified, it brings our two newest files to the top. The tool always creates the same two files. They always have the same default name, and that's conf point processed and ODOT surface check report. The conf point processed file is basically a text file for import back into ORD of your processed points with their correct codes for passing or failing, and then two attributes, one for the terrain model elevation and one for the delta between the terrain model and the confidence point. And then your surface check report is a PDF file that should look familiar. It has the input file names at the top, a little information about when it was created. It has our summary table for our point statistics as far as how many points passed, how many points failed, the 3 times failure, and then it has the details. Passing, 3 times failures, and at the very bottom, it has some additional table. It lists the points that fall outside of your DTM or outside of your terrain. So these are all confidence points that were outside of the boundary. And then it has a listing for any points with invalid codes or points with mismatched coordinates. So if it couldn't match the point list with the terrain check file, then those will be listed here. And you'd want to investigate if you have any points that show up in those lists. So because these are both project-related files now, we need to move those to our project folder. So I just have a demo folder set up here. I'm going to select both of those files, and I'm going to drag them and move them to my demo folder. And then I'm going to rename them. I'm going to add a prefix to them. 20485 OG underbar merged. And that way I know which surface they go with, I know which project they go with. And if you were to have multiple results by adding the prefix, then the files will not be overwritten. If you left them with their original name, the next time you run the tool, those files will be overwritten and you'd lose this project data. So that completes the second step, or the second section. So now we're going to maximize ORD again. Going to collapse a few things there to make it easier to see. Now, because this is processed data, we do not want to put them, we don't want to put the process points in the same field book as the original data, because this process data is based off of the terrain we created with the original data. It's no longer original data. So we're going to go to field book, say create new field book, and then we're going to enter the name for the field book. And just to keep it simple, we're going to call it conf point processed. And then a data point to accept that field book name. And now notice over here in Explorer, I have two field books. My new field book doesn't have any data file in it yet. So we want to import the process confidence points now. So on the field book tab, import group, we're going to select file. We're going to select the confidence point processed field book. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the file type. Now we have an ODOT or Oregon DOT CSV file. That's our standard data. And what we want is a text file, and we want the confidence point process text file. Now this is going to do two things. It sets the right import template so it understands the records, and then it also adds a sort or a filter to your folder so that all you see is the text files. I'm going to select the processed confidence points. I'm going to say open. So the confidence points, the process confidence points have now been imported. And to make this a little bit easier to see, we want to turn off a few of those features from the original data. Now, what's imported are all of the confidence points with their corresponding shape. So this is a graded confidence point, has a hexagon. It has the point number for the point, and it has a value for the delta. And the colors are set by their status. So this is a surface confidence point with a circle. Red means failing 3 times, but I think we can see why is that's not necessarily on the surface. It looks to be just outside of the surface. Also, all those confidence points that fell outside of your terrain have been imported, but because they're not processed against the terrain, they just come back in with their raw code. So confidence point natural, or in this case, confidence point graded. So because they're imported into their own field book, we can manipulate the display of the data from that field book, and we could display only those process confidence points that are failing 3 times. And to make this a little easier, remember, if you have your survey details, and I select one of my codes, confidence point surface 3 times failed, then we can zoom right to every point and look at it directly. Now we could also have the report up and we could be following through the report. But let's fix a couple of these failures. Obviously, this is not a surfaced confidence point. But if I were to change this point, I'm actually changing the processed point. So this is the step where you do need to have your original data turned back on. And I'm going to make sure that I grab my point that is my original data. And this is well outside of the paved surface, so I don't think it should be a CPS. Let's change it to a CPN. As soon as I hit enter, it disappeared because I have the CPNs turned off still. But now notice that'll change. Now these ones have a 15-foot elevation difference, 17-foot elevation difference, 22. I don't think these points should be in this surface. These are confidence points that belong in the bridge deck surface. So we will delete those. Now we have another confidence point that's 2 feet different. Looks like those 2 confidence points are actually taken on top of the guardrail. So those are completely in error. So one of the things we can do, if we're not sure what this point should be, if it was coded wrong and we want to come back to it, is if we turn it into something that's not used in the terrain or is not a confidence point, we can still keep the point data in the field book and we can come back to it later. If I delete it, then it's gone from the field book. So I'm going to change it into a generic point. I'm going to change this one into a generic point. Let's do this very last one and let's call this one graded. So obviously there's a few more in here that would need to be fixed, but for demonstration purposes, let's move on and run a second iteration of the confidence points. So I have my survey details. I'm going to go select my codes for my confidence points. Click in the upper left-hand corner, right-click, export as land XML format, and this is my points list, but I'm going to call it points list 02 so I can keep it straight with my project data. I'm going to save. I'm going to create my selection set again. I've got 489 points in my survey details, and I've got 489 objects selected in ORD. I go to terrain, analysis, points, and analyze elevation. And I can't select my terrain. That's because I turned it off in my levels. So if I turn terrain display back on, now I can select some part of that terrain, data point to use the elements, and go with the tolerance value. Select the raw XML format, save as, and then same thing, I'm going to add an O2 suffix. Point list, it's our O2 point list. Terrain check is the O2 terrain check. I've got 2 new files. So I'm going to select both. Then add the O2. And now with the second confidence point run, or the second processing set, remember we originally had 9 3x failures in the surfaced. Now we only have 1. So the last step would be to bring that second processing run back in. And I cannot do it with the same data file or with the same field book because they're all the same point numbers. So if I'm going to bring a second set in, I can either delete the first set and keep it in the confidence point processed, or, and for example, I'll just make a secondary field book. And this time we're going to call it confidence point processed 02. And then each data set will be in its own field book. Select File Import again. Select the O2 field book. Because we've already done this once, it remembered the type we wanted. And now we have all the processed confidence points in from the second iteration. You would continue those same steps until all points had been evaluated and all failures had either been resolved or explained. And obviously, sometimes you need to manipulate the surface data, or because this surface is based off of survey data, you would need to manipulate the survey data to correct a problem in the terrain. Hope this video has been helpful, and please reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.